If you have followed me for past couple of months, I spoke about various ways of authenticating the Salesforce by itself. But why do we have to have a different ways of authenticating Salesforce in the first place? There must be a reason for this madness, right? Let's address that elephant in the room because as an architect, you would be asking yourself one crucial question: what is that flow enablement that I have to enable so that external systems can authenticate themselves? Welcome to Salesforce with Vinayaka. Today we are going to talk about different flow enablements and the security that it can come with so that this episode becomes a one pocket guide for you to choose what is the flow enablement that you have to choose based on your use case. What are we going to cover in this particular episode? We are going to talk about external client application versus connected app, which we have detailedly covered in our episode 1 if you have followed me, and we are going to talk about different flow enablements that it can come with and the securities that it can tag along and what all the use cases that have, so that we will talk about the analogies. Based on those analogies and based on the use case that you have, this episode will help you to choose the right flow enablement for your use case. Let's talk a bit of external client application and what all it actually brings to the board. We know that in the particular episode 1 we have covered in detail how different metadata are present for developers versus admin and how the connected applications used to override has been eliminated in external client application feature. And because of this becomes a true second generation package, and that's why it is also known for supporting true second generation package feature deployments. Now, as we know, whenever external client application gets deployed to production, unlike connected application, these are not enabled by themselves. That means whenever you deploy external client applications, you have to go to your org and then you have to enable your profiles or permission sets. Based on that, the external client application will start be visible to other external applications so that they can authenticate. But in connected application, it used to be just deploy and then the client secret and client id is to be replicated from the sandbox to production, and the application is already visible by default. But here, that's why external client applications are security by default. This will not be enabled by themselves. Someone has to go inside production and then they have to actually enable that for a given profile and the permission set. That's why there are no global leaks that are happening just like connected applications. There are no global leaks that will happen in external client applications. But as we know, everything is not covered in external client applications. There may be few scenarios where you may have to still stick with connected applications because these are the few features like mobile app pin security, or for example, if you have any particular application in mobile SDK and that is tagging to Salesforce connected application, then you know that there is to be a security enablement where in the mobile applications you were forced to enter your PIN or maybe biometric. So if your business is asking to have that feature still enabled, then you may have to go with connected applications. But let's say the other scenario is, as a user I have logged into one of the browser, and I have in the browser and I want to do web server flow. If you are using connected applications, then between the authentication of Salesforce to redirecting them to a different page, you can actually invoke your custom business logic using Apex launch handlers. If you are still have to use that, then you may have to stick with your connected applications. There must be another scenarios like there are different external systems that are there as a application. You want to create those connected app in Salesforce dynamically. If you want to create the dynamic client applications and then connected applications has to be created in Salesforce, then you may still have to rely on connected application. As I spoke just while back, external client application needs someone to go into that particular production org or the sandbox org and enable the profile and permission set for you because it is not visible by default. If in case of the other use cases, if you're using the user credentials, username and password, and using that particular security token, if you remember, if you're using the username password with security token tagged along and then you are authenticating your Salesforce, then you may have to still stick with connected application because external client app does not support any username password credential kind of authentication that will be there, and this is eventually going to be halted or going to be deprecated in very near future. So we spoke about connected applications when to be used. We spoke about what all the external client applications enablement that can actually bring the security and all. So let's talk about the flow enablement that is crucial for us, right? So as an architect, if you have to choose which flow enablement, then you yourself have to ask one crucial question, that is, do I have to carry the user context or not? If you want to carry the user context, then you have three options available for you: web server flow, jot bearer flow, or token exchange flow. But let's say you don't have to carry the user context, it is just a system to system integration, then you have client credentials, or if you want to go with the device enablement, then the device flow enablement is there. But as we know, device enablement flow is actually going to be deprecated in a very near future, but not deprecated yet. They will be using this particular releases to actually going to deprecate in a very near future. So that's why if you don't want to carry user context, then you have one bingo answer, that is client credentials. So you should go with client credentials, where the system to system integration can happen in the backend, and then whatever the context that the client application will run, that will run as integration user or run as user. If you have followed me for the second episode of client credential enablement, we actually enabled one of the feature, that is run as in the user context. That means whenever you enable the client credential, you have to choose what is that user that you may have to run, because based on that authorization, it will run the whatever the applications that are there. So that's why whenever machine to machine is happening, we usually tend to go with integration user, because we want to give full access to that, because the context is not carry forwarded and we want to do all the automations. So in episode 2 we just spoke about postman level of authenticating, but in the real use case you can talk about your ERP systems that has to connect to your Salesforce in the backend overnight, where it will run daily once or maybe weekly once and then pull the records. So since it is running to machine, usually we usually go with integration users, and login run as user will be done with integration user. But let's say we talk about web server flow. We spoke in the episode 3 that as a partner, I want to actually log into AWS server, but I need to carry the user context. So that in that case, we used web server flow, where user by themselves will be authenticating that particular org. So if you have a business requirement where you want to allow your users to authenticate by themselves, and based on that you want to pull the information, then only you should go with your web server flow. For example, if you want to go with your calendar, G calendar or Microsoft calendar, Outlook, you want to pull that events into your Salesforce system for the partners, then as a partner I can actually log into the community, and then I can authenticate the Google calendar, then all the calendar invites can be fetched in. So that is also one of the use case that we can solve using that. But the critical point that we have to notice in web server flow, this is the most flow enablement security scrutiny that will happen, which we will talk in a minute. Because as a user you will be using browser, which we don't know which system that the user is actually using, and based on that we have to enable multiple securities, which we will be talking in a minute. Based on that security only you should be able to give the access token and the other details to the systems that are actually trying to authenticate. Device enablement flow, as we spoke in the previous episodes also, if you have any OTT kind of thing where you will be asked for any code, based on that the applications can be authenticated. But in terms of Salesforce, what we can talk about is if there is any hardware constraint in that application or the remote places where you would not be able to use your username and password to log in, or you don't have an you cannot actually use your point and click methods, then you have to go with the device enablement flow. As I was saying a while back, if you have to really go with device enablement flow, I would highly recommend that you first go with the scrutiny that is happening with Salesforce with respect to the device enablement flow. Based on that, you can take a decision on the business needs. Coming to the jot bearer flow, we spoke also on our episode that how Salesforce to Salesforce authentication can happen using jot. In this, the one crucial point is the user context was actually carrying forward, but there was no need of user to authenticate themselves, right? Just like unlike in the web server flow where the user has to go and authenticate by themselves, in jot bearer flow you don't have to ask user, but you can act on their behalf behind the scenes. That's why the servers to server integration that you have to do, and also you have to carry your user context. The best possible flow enablement that you can go is the jot bearer flow. And if you have any identity provider, custom identity provider like Okta, then you can go easily with the token exchange flow, because you can trust your identity provider to handle all the security ways, and then they can actually authenticate your Salesforce and pull the records along with them. So as I was saying, if you want to carry the user context, you have three options. If you don't have to carry the user context, then you have only one option, that is the client credential flow. So let's talk about the various securities that each flow enablement can actually come with, right? So we will first cover the web server flow, because that is the most scrutiny security that can happen for any given flow enablement that we have taken in the example. Based on this particular security, we can easily understand other securities and why it is not actually applicable. So let's quickly jump with web server flow, which is also known as authorization code and credentials flow. What is saying is require security for web server flow. That means whenever a user actually logs to browser and they want to authenticate the Salesforce, as I told, let's take an example that as a partner I want to pull all my calendar invite. Now there is a button that browser in the community we have where you can actually tag your or add your calendar. When you click on that particular add your calendar, then you have to send your security to the Google. Based on that security only, you will be able to authenticate. It's not just the credentials that you have to also pass the security of the application that you have built. So based on that particular credential security only, along with the credentials and the security tagged along, you will be able to get the access token. If not, you will not be able to get. And it is very crucial for us to enable this, because let's say as a partner in our episode that we spoke about, I want to log into AWS or I want to log into the partner portal, then I have to send the username and password as a partner, that is for sure. But in the back end, you should also ask for the application security, which is external client application security, so that you know this is the valid request that is coming in. So that's why it is very crucial for us to enable this particular checkbox and require security for refresh token. Any application that we have, connected application or external client application, there are two different security or two different tokens that we'll be having. One is refresh token and one is the access token. Refresh token is long lived, access token is short lived. So access token can live up to 2 years, but refresh token can live up to 1 year as well, right? So if anyone actually comes in between as a middle person, as a hacker, and they get the security token, then they can easily trade that particular refresh token. Then they can easily trade that particular refresh token for an access token. If you have to avoid that and if you want to have a greater security or the best security, then you should ask for the client credentials, client secret as well, right? Along with the refresh token that they will be sending, you should expect the client secret as well, so that based on those two details only, you would be able to get the access token from Salesforce. So that is why it is very crucial for us to enable this particular checkbox in the web server flow, because there can be different devices that they can authenticate and it is very prone to hacking. So that's why you should always enable this particular checkbox. Whenever they are trying to get the access token based on the refresh token, then they should send the client secret as well. Then coming to the proof key for code exchange, also known as PKCE key. Now different systems, different people are logging to different devices. Whenever they are trying to go to the browser, let's say I have a mobile application, I go to the mobile browser, I actually click on that particular authenticate to Salesforce. As soon as I done that, now that particular device will send me one code verifier along with the username and password that the people or the person who is entering. So once I have that particular username and password along with that particular device code, based on that only you will be able to send the access token. So why this is relevant? So whenever you actually click on authenticate, there are time gap between username and password that a person who will be entering. So during this time, if they have any hacker, they have any access to this particular username and password, then they can easily trade that to access token and get your access to Salesforce. But since you are enabled this particular checkbox, it is expecting one more parameter called as code verifier, which will differ for each devices. So whenever a person actually tries to authenticate, the client secret, client credentials along with the code verifier will also be sent to verify whether this is the right device that was actually requested in the first place or not. If the code verifier matches, then only the access token would be actually sent across. So that is the reason we have to enable PKCE key, where we suspect that the devices that are actually going to authenticate the Salesforce are not trustworthy. Enablement refresh token rotation. That means whenever we spoke about refresh token actually expires for an year, right? It can live up to 1 year. But what if they want to choose, or what if they want to trade a new refresh token for the expired one, right? In that case also, you can actually ask the client secret to be sent along with the request, so that you know this is the right application that is trying to get this refresh token, I mean the new refresh token. So that is the reason we have to enable all these particular check boxes based on the business use cases for the web server flow. As I told, this is the one particular flow enablement which will actually go under a lot of scrutiny, because you have to choose all these securities based on your business use case. But let's come back to the client credential flow. Since it is a system to system integration, you don't have any worry about the devices, you don't have to worry about the user context. That's why there are no security that you may have to enable based on your business use case. Coming to device enablement flow, I would not touch more upon it because we have already covered the various securities. The same thing applies to device flow enablement as well, and also the token exchange flow. But coming to the JWT bearer flow, if you have observed our previous episodes, we were actually trying to carry the user context, and before that, when we were doing the setup, there were two keys that were actually set up. One is the private key and one is the public key. So this JWT authentication, we have to checkbox the bearer. For the JWT bearer flow, we have to check this JOT authentication, because we have to have that particular authentication based on the standard JOT authentication by itself, right? So if you want to know more about the JOT enablement and the setup that we have to do, please check that particular episode that I have spoke about in the previous episodes in the same playlist. Now, we spoke about different flow enablement, we spoke about different security it can actually come up with, but what is your use case for which you can actually enable which flow enablement, right? So that is the question that you are trying to answer yourself in this episode. So we are going to cover that in a simple analogy, so that you will be knowing based on the discussion that we had based on the user context. And let's say you have a different user context, or you don't have a user context, you already got an answer for the flow enablement. But if you want to have a user context and you're confused with which flow enablement that you have to go, because you have to carry the user context, in this particular analogies you would be able to understand how or why we have to choose that particular flow enablement. So client credential, simple analogy that you can think: you have a friend who is coming to your house and you are not in house, but you trust that particular friend, right? So you can tell them that the key is under the mat, that is a client secret that you have. Use that particular client secret and log into your house, right? So that is a simple analogy that we can go with client credentials flow. But for the web server flow, which actually goes under a lot of scrutiny, you have various ways of authenticating that. For example, you have went to abroad, you have booked an Airbnb, you got an email of the confirmation. Now you have to do two levels of verification, because Airbnb is actually owned by a individual user, right? And the entire flat or the entire apartment is actually handled by different security people, right? So they are not interconnected to them, but they have a way of authenticating by themselves internally. So that's why you would actually first meet your owner, get that particular kind of a short-lived token kind of, or maybe a paper, authenticated paper, or the signature, or maybe an email from the owner, so that you can display to the security. Based on that particular authentication that they will do based on that authentication done by security, and they will verify from the back end that whether this particular XYZ was supposed to enter your flat or not. Based on that, they can actually allow you to go into the flat. So that is the web server flow that we can think of. Device activation flow, like you would have already used your OTT platforms like Netflix or maybe Disney Hotstars, then you would be logging to your smartphone, I mean smart devices like TV. Then you will be using your smartphone to enter the code, and then based on that enter the in whatever the code that you have entered. Based on that, you would be able to enjoy your show in the smart TV. So that is one way of looking at the device enablement flow. Coming to the JOT bearer flow, where you would have the private and the public key, right? So now consider that you want to go to a particular launch, but there are two different sections of launch. One is the general and one is the VIP. Now in the VIP launch, if you have to go, let's assume that you have to take a permission from the VIP person who are actually entitled to enter that particular VIP zone. So now you actually connected to your close friend who is VIP, and then you have got a signature from them, or maybe a particular application from them, that this particular person XYZ is actually allowed to enter to VIP. Now that acts like a public, because anyone can actually have that particular paper. But when you actually present to the launch security, they would actually check that particular verified signature along with what they have from the backend, because they would be knowing that how this particular signature looks like, what is the stamp that looks like. Based on that particular decision, which is a private key, based on that they can actually allow you inside the launch of VIP. So that could be one of the jot bearer analogy that we can think of. Now, token exchange flow, simply we can consider as a theme park. When you go to any theme park, first you will actually buy the ticket, but instead of the ticket, like you would not be actually going to each ride and you will be not showing that ticket, right? So instead of that, there will be an exchange that will happen. Based on that particular ticket, you would get actually a wristband or maybe some kind of stamp that you may get, and based on that, operator would know whether this particular person belongs to VIP or the general queue. Based on that particular queue, you can actually enjoy your rides, and then you don't have to display your ticket each time, right? So that is a token exchange flow. In this case, the authentication can be done by a custom identifier. Based on that, it can easily do the job in the Salesforce authentication. So these are the simple analogies. I hope that based on your use case and based on the discussion that we had in this episode, you would be able to choose the right flow enablement based on your use case that you are trying to solve for. So that is what I am hoping for, right? That you are able to solve your flow enablement question that you have in your mind. So thank you for staying tuned on this particular episode. And if you have anything that you want to revisit back, please check out my all the episodes on external client application episode. So you would be able to see all the different flow enablement that we spoke about in very detail, where I have covered each of them in a different episodes on that particular use cases. Thank you so much for staying tuned.